John Flavell in 1979 first described metacognition as thinking about thinking or cognitions about cognitions. However, the idea of using self-knowledge to promote human development and understanding is an ancient idea. Over 3,000 years ago, the phrase, "Know thyself and thou shalt know the universe and God," was carved on the temple of Apollo at Delphi in ancient Greece and was attributed to Socrates by Plato in his dialogues. However, the phrase is also attributable to the African pharaoh Amenhotep and was written in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, stating, "Name yourself in your heart and know who you are." Literary and metaphorical evidence for metacognitive thinking is everywhere. It seems unlikely that you would develop writing without metacognition. So literary evidence is demonstrated across ancient societies and is reflected in the historical record. In China, the practice was identified by Lao Tzu in the 33rd verse of the Tao. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Some of the earliest expressions of this idea of an interaction between a subjective, experiential self and an objective, contemplative self that can regulate achievement of higher and more developed behaviors are expressed metaphorically in the Hindu Rig Veda parable of the body and the soul. It goes, "Two birds with fair wings, inseparable companions, have found refuge in the same sheltering tree. One incessantly eats from the fig tree, the other, not eating, just looks on." These ancient references to the metacognitive practice of knowing oneself seem to point to a much deeper understanding of the learning process than would be expected from primitive cultures. This may be the result of the modern shift to compulsory public education, as discussed. Modern references to metacognition would start with William James, who in 1890 made one of the earliest references in modern Western psychology to the self-observing power of the brain. John Dewey placed self-reflection as the most crucial component of both learning and a healthy democracy. The first laboratory investigations of a metacognitive skill were done in 1965 by J.T. Hart, who did the first research on memory and the feeling of knowing, which is considered to be one of the first modern studies of a metacognitive skill. And then there's John Flavell, who in 1979 coined the term metacognition and described it within an experimental framework capable of probing the neurological relationships of conscious cognition, behavior, and performance. Flavell was first to really dive into the cognitive impact of having thoughts about thoughts and made the initial delineations that separated metacognitive knowledge from metacognitive regulation. In the 90s, Nelson extended the definition of thoughts about thoughts to include an integration of knowledge and regulation with monitoring and control of these behaviors, making even more nuanced neurological investigations possible. I've made other videos on these psychologists and researchers, and you can find links below.